Independent Police Investigative Directorate, or IPID, has concluded their findings into the death of Collins Khosa, who was that it was caused by blunt force trauma to the head hours after allegedly being assaulted by members of the South African National Defence Force. This happened in Alexandra, and it comes after the South African Defence Minister, Nosiviwe Mapisa Nqakula, had said that the military members were allegedly involved had been vindicated. Now, the IPID investigation, which was undertaken to establish the role of the police who were present during the assault, has been sent to the Johannesburg Metro Police Department for further action. The Directorate has recommended disciplinary action be taken against 5 Metro Police officers who were present during the Khosa assault, and that a disciplinary process be undertaken regarding 2 SAPS officers as well. IPID, who were supposed to join us this morning for this discussion, have said that they would have to reschedule. We have, however, managed to get hold of legal researcher at the Legal Resource Centre, Edwin Makwati, to speak to us about this matter. Edwin, thanks so much for speaking to us this morning. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thanks for having me, Sakina.
Let's first start off with context, just for the benefit of all who are watching. The Legal Resource Centre, what exactly does it do?
The Legal Resources Centre is one of the public interest law firms in South Africa, which has been doing this work of ensuring that the poor and the marginalized are not abused in any way by those that are in power, and by ensuring that apartheid is fought with all weapons available legally and otherwise, by doing strategic litigation and advocacy in order to ensure that the poor people of South Africa are protected from the might of the law and state repression, among other things, and has continued to do so for the past 4 years with distinction.
So, Edwin, it is, of course, the mandate of IPID to investigate the conduct of SAPS or police members, but some people end up coming to the Legal Resources Centre. Please tell us about your clientele and why, on which cases do they mostly approach you?
Yes, as you say, IPID has been mandated to be the police watchdog, and to ensure that the police are held accountable for abuses, especially torture, death in police custody, assault, rape in police custody, among other things. But this has not been something that IPID has done very well in the past few years, and they have cited a lot of things, among which is lack of resources and lack of financial resources and human resources for that matter. However, there is also a problem of independence that I've seen, which has come to our attention, that IPID does not seem to have the requisite independence that it has. And it has come across from the clients that we have, which are mostly the poor black majority of this country, who are mostly assaulted but do not have any recourse to justice, because in most cases, IPID tends to refuse to investigate some of the cases on the basis that they are unsubstantiated or there's no evidence or whatever other grounds. So what we do as the Legal Resources Centre is to put pressure on IPID to do the necessary investigations impartially and promptly in accordance with the obligation that South Africa has in terms of both domestic law, i.e. the Constitution, the Prevention and Torture of Combating of Persons Act, and other international instruments, including the Convention Against Torture and the International Covenant on Political and Civil Rights.
And of course, if we look at IPID's 2018-19 report, it indicates that 393 people who died in police cells in that period, 124 cases of rape by police officers and so on. Do you know how many have actually been prosecuted of those particular cases? If you look at the statistics of IPID for the past 5 years, I'm going to start from 2014 to 2018, 2019. There were about 30,000 cases reported in total in the last 5 years. And in all those cases, only 1.3% of people who have been either assaulted, raped, or tortured by IPID or died in police custody, only 1.3% of the culprits have ever been criminally convicted. The remaining 3.9% have been given internal disciplinary sanctions ranging from suspension, verbal warnings,
suspension without pay, and all those light kind of sanctions that do not really reflect the gravity of the brutality that has been meted out on the people. 96% of all the perpetrators of torture, which is mostly police officers, go with total impunity. And that is the concerning factor of this whole police brutality in South Africa, because we know statistics show. We have statistics that show that South Africa, in terms of number of police deaths per 1 million people, is about only the second to Honduras, I think, in the world. And then in terms of the actual numbers, South Africa ranks number 12 in the world out of 193 countries of deaths in police custody or other settings. And that is a cause for concern, because there is totally no prosecution at the rate at which we would desire it to be in the sense, in the context of South Africa.
What would you say could be possible reasons for this, Edwin?
There are several factors, Sakina, that I can mention to you. And the first factor is independence. We realize that most of the time when laws are done, it's more for a tick box exercise, and we should desist from that. There must be more political will. And when the law fails, sometimes morality and ethics should dictate what is wrong or right. So it's mostly an independence issue. IPID is under the same ministry as the police, and that makes it to lack the requisite structural and institutional independence. And then secondly, you find that most of the officers that are investigators at IPID actually come from the SAPS, and there's always that kind of sympathy towards an organization that you've been part of for a long time. And in the process, there is no impartiality and willingness to do investigations on their own members. So one of the problems that causes that is because there is a lot of political. I'm sure you could have seen in the case of McBride versus the Minister of Police, for example, that one of the things that we argued is that IPID does not have the requisite independence as per the Glenister case test, which says the legislation that establishes the oversight institution must vindicate adequately the rights in the Bill of Rights. And the legislation has not done so adequately hitherto. And we are glad that in the past few days, the President of South Africa actually signed into law the IPID Amendment Bill, which, although kind of looked at the independence of IPID in a narrow manner, is a step in the right direction. And we hope that it will help to limit the issues of independence that are rampant within IPID. And secondly, it would have been more appropriate for IPID to fall in a ministry such as the Justice Ministry, for example, where they could not be hierarchically related to the police, where now they are not able to hold the police accountable because of that clash of interests.
Now, if we look at the Collins Khosa case as an example and what happened there, firstly, your view on the conduct of IPID, because they've been criticized in terms of how they have handled this particular case as well.
Yes, the High Court's judgment in the Collins Khosa case, I've said previously on the that is a watershed moment in the history of South Africa, adjudication of torture cases in South Africa. And when the court gave that judgment, we had hoped that it completely changed the playing field in South Africa when it comes to the prosecution of torture cases in terms of the Prevention and Combating of Torture of Persons Act of 2013. The judge gave a very scathing judgment on the police, the defense force, and then directed IPID to carry out investigations and report back investigations they carried out. Now, if you look at the Prevention and Combating of Torture of Persons Act, it describes torture as the infliction of severe pain or suffering, whether it be mental, with the aim of soliciting evidence or punishing a person for a crime that he or another party might have committed or is alleged to have committed. And the Section 4 of the Prevention of Torture Act says that the offense is punishable by imprisonment, including imprisonment of up to life. There is no how IPID could have it shouldn't have just seen that the befitting sanction is to recommend internal disciplinary hearings within the police, because we know the SAPS has been ranked as the most corrupt institution in South Africa in the past year. And when we say that they should do internal disciplinary hearings, we are doing something that we know they won't be able to vindicate adequately and promptly and impartially, because there's always that kind of spirit of solidarity, of not wanting to punish the people that are liable for certain brutalities within the society. So IPID has not done a good job in only done a tick box exercise to try and only comply, just like the SANDF has done, with the court judgment. And it is not adequate, and it must be rejected. And IPID must do the right thing and give people of South Africa confidence that they are there to be the police watchdog that they are meant to be.
Well, when you talk about systemic corruption within the police service, and you spoke about similar problems at IPID as well, where does this leave the public in terms of the recourse that they have? Because if you look at the Collins Khosa case again, the IPID report shows that the Metro Police officers and the 2 SAPS officers just stood by. They actually were told, one of the witnesses, to just run home. So where does this leave the public in terms of what they can do and where they can go for recourse?
You see, I think at this point in time, we all have the evidence before us, and this came in with the blessing of this COVID-19 lockdown and the Collins Khosa case. The public cannot trust the police as they should. And I think what we are seeing is more of a low-intensity conflict or a low-intensity war against the public, where people are even reluctant to report cases to the police. And this was completely vindicated in the Khosa case. There is no how police can tell a person to run home, and we think that is just acceptable. What should have happened is that those police should have taken action, and they standing there and doing nothing amounts to acquiescence. And for me, and for the law, applicable law, which is the Prevention and Combating of Torture of Persons Act, that is acquiescence, and they have equally taken part in the torture and assault and eventual death of Mr. Khosa. There is no how they can be clean and go scot-free, because all the elements of torture and other cruel treatment has been met in this particular case by the Metro and the SAPS who were present. So what IPID has done is not enough and amounts to completely putting even a greater wedge between the public and the police in terms of trust.
Now, you referred to the signing of the IPID bill by the President a little earlier on. Will this go at least some ways towards resolving some of these problems that IPID currently is faced with?
It is hoped that it will. But from our previous experiences, we have seen that South Africa does not have a shortage of laws. It's got the best constitution and the most progressive laws that have been hailed by many international organizations and other countries. What lacks is political will more than laws or anything. And as much as the amendment is very much welcome, it falls short of meeting the international standards that are set out for example, in the Convention Against Torture and the ICCPR. So what we need more is the laws to also go in tandem with the actions of the politicians. If, for example, a minister goes on record to say people should scope and donor people, or a general goes and says the same thing, what accountability measures are there? Because then there is a bit of morality issues that are not being adhered to in this particular case. So it is more about accountability from the side of both politicians and good laws as well. But we have seen in many countries we can call anything independent this or independent that, independent electoral commission, independent investigative directorate. Calling it independent does not make it independent. What makes it independent is the actual practical independence that can be both perceived and be seen. And that has not happened in this particular case. And I think we need better involvement and morality from the politicians to see that what is happening is wrong. And when the law fails, sometimes we've got to resort to our understanding and consciousness of what is wrong or right.
Well, when you call for, a better action, I would imagine you're talking about better oversight from Parliament as an example. But we've had this. There's a whole portfolio committee that sits regularly. That doesn't seem to have made any difference in terms of how IPID or the SAPS, for that matter, or the Metro Police departments behave.
Definitely it hasn't. And I think there is a tendency amongst our law enforcement and security personnel or those in high ranks to think they are not part of this country or part of the Constitution, in the sense that if you look at what the SANDF, for example, said in front of the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee, they have told them very explicitly that you are not our clients. We report directly to the president. So in essence, you can't give us orders of what to do. But look, whatever we disagree on or agree on, there's one thing that ultimately makes us to meet, and that is the Constitution of South Africa, where we have the shared values of dignity, equality, and freedoms. So what should be happening here is that the portfolio committees and all the other structures that are in place should be seen not only to exist, but should also be seen to be effective and functioning accordingly. And where people act contemptuously against those institutions which are the custodians of the Constitution, such people must be held liable, and there must be consequences. Otherwise, we incentivize complete contempt against state institutions that are meant to protect the Constitution and the people of South Africa.
So where does that leave an institution, an organization such as the Legal Resources Center in a case like, for example, the Collins Khosa case? Earlier in the week, if I can just digress a little bit, I was talking to one of our reporters in Limpopo who's doing a story on a mother who burnt. So the information that the reporter managed to gather was that there was a 14-year-old girl. She came home late, went to sleep. The mother, in the middle of the night, wakes up, boils water and burns the daughter. The subsequent action is that the maternal grandmother tries to report this, and the police tell her, you can't do this because the mother is pregnant. So there are so many examples like that where it seems that the police don't know or are just unwilling to enforce the law as it should be. Where does that leave an organization like yours to come in and support the public?
I think the Legal Resources Center and other organizations and other partner organizations that we work with, for example, the Benchmarks Foundation, the ISS, and the Omega Research Foundation, have come out strongly to say, you know what, we're going to hold everybody accountable regardless of who they are in government. And we're going to ensure that we strategically litigate and we compound our advocacy efforts. And what we tend to do is to educate people about their rights. But not only there, we hold conferences and workshops to continually train and inform those people who are in law enforcement, legal practitioners, medical, psychological experts on proper documentation of cases like this. So we continually work with our other strategic partners to ensure that we do not become lax and rest only on the law, but also practical steps towards ensuring that everyone who is involved, every stakeholder, especially law enforcement, are taken to task. And where we are able to work with them to train them and show them what the law says and what the law should be, we try to do that. And that has happened in the past few months. We have, and the past 2 years actually, we have been holding workshops on this kind of police brutality issues. We have had meetings with IPID. We have had workshops where we invite members of the SAPS. Of course, during the meetings and the trainings, the response is positive, but we have problems in that we are not seeing the behavioral change, and the statistics continue to go up. Now we are left with another leg now, which is to litigate even more strategically to ensure that those that do not listen to what the law says or do not want to vindicate the law properly are taken to task. I think that's the best that we can do, and continue to evaluate the factors and change our schemes of maneuver in how we deal with this kind of issues going forward. And I think we'll succeed with concerted efforts from the LRC and their partners and government departments and other stakeholders, especially community members. We ensure that community members are a great part of these efforts, especially in the impoverished areas of South Africa, the townships and other marginalized people of this country.
Just a final question. Do you have the requisite resources, Edwin Makwati, to actually do what you want to do as the Legal Resources Center?
Like any organization, I do not think there can ever be enough. But what we try to do is that the few resources that we have, we try to use them as efficiently as possible and as meticulously as possible. But would appeal, to anybody who is able to see this kind of work that we're doing, come on board and work with us in whatever way possible, whether it's financial support, whether it's through litigation support and other means, whether it's advocacy, to partner with us and continue to work towards protecting the constitution of this country. Because without the constitution, we might as well give up on the values that we all stand for. And as long as we keep the constitution intact and we will protect it, I believe the Legal Resources Center and other organizations that are like-minded can go a long way in helping the people of South Africa to realize the goals that they fought for so long.
Well, thanks so much for your time this morning. Edwin Makwati, a legal researcher at the Legal Resources Center, talking to us about the role that law enforcement institutions such as IPID and should play and their commitment to public accountability, especially on the back of the Collins Khosa the death allegedly at the hands of members of the SANDF. And this happening while 5 members of JMPD stood by and 2 of those law enforcement officials were members of SAPS. They also stood by. So we'll leave that there for the time being. Take a quick break and then bring you the latest news.